My stepmother smirked. "I've cancelled all your supplier contracts and given them to my daughter." I replied, "Interesting choice." 1 year later, Paris Fashion Week revealed the truth. The sound of stilettos clicking against marble echoed through the office hallway as Victoria Bennett stormed into my design studio. Her daughter, Madison, trailing behind with that all-too-familiar smirk. At 35, I had spent the last decade building Lena Rose from a small boutique into one of New York's most promising emerging fashion brands, but my stepmother had other plans. "I've cancelled all your supplier contracts and given them to Madison," Victoria announced, tossing a stack of papers onto my desk. "The board meeting just concluded. As the majority shareholder, I've decided Lena Rose needs fresh blood." I looked up from the sketches I had been working on for our upcoming spring collection. My hands steadied despite the rage building inside me. "Interesting choice," I replied, keeping my voice level. "My name is Elena Anderson, and this wasn't the first time Victoria had tried to sabotage me. Ever since she married my father 3 years ago, she had been positioning Madison to take over everything I had built. The fact that Madison had no fashion experience beyond shopping with Daddy's credit card apparently didn't matter. "Oh, don't act so surprised, Elena," Madison chimed in, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "Everyone knows Lena Rose needs updating. Your designs are so basic." At 26, my stepsister had never worked a day in her life. Yet here, she was ready to claim my life's work as her own. I thought about the journey that have brought me here. After my mother passed away when I was 20, I used her life insurance money to start Lena Rose, naming it after her favorite flowers. Every collection, every design carried pieces of her spirit. Now Victoria and Madison were trying to erase that too. "The contracts will be transferred by the end of the week," Victoria continued, clearly disappointed by my calm demeanor. "Madison will take over as creative director. You can stay on as a consultant if you'd like." Her lips curved into a cold smile. "We're family after all." Family. The word felt bitter in my mouth. My father, Thomas Anderson, had been absent since Victoria entered our lives, too enchanted by his new wife to notice how she was systematically dismantling everything I had created. His signature was probably on those board documents too, though he hadn't bothered to show up himself. "That won't be necessary," I said, standing up. "I assume you'll want my office cleared out by tomorrow?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. "How generous of you to offer." "Yes. Tomorrow would be perfect. Madison needs to start working on salvaging what's left of this brand." As they turned to leave, Madison paused at the door. "Don't worry, big sis. I'll take good care of your little hobby." Hobby. 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears reduced to a hobby. I waited until their footsteps faded before allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. But instead of tears, I felt a strange sense of calm. Because Victoria and Madison had made one crucial mistake, they had underestimated me. Opening my desk drawer, I pulled out a leather-bound notebook, my mother's old journal. Inside were not just her thoughts and dreams, but also the contact information for her old friends in the fashion industry, people she had worked with during her own career as a designer, people who owed her favors. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had memorized but never used. After 3 reams, a familiar French accent answered. "Hello. Monsieur Laurent? This is Elena Anderson, Diana Rose's daughter." There was a pause, then warmth filled his voice. "Ah, petite Elena. Your mother spoke of you often. How can I help?" I took a deep breath. "I need to call in that favor you promised her. It's time." My mother had always told me to keep my cards close until the right moment. While Victoria had been busy manipulating the board and stealing my contracts, I had been quietly preparing for this possibility. The suppliers she had canceled, they weren't the only ones in the industry, and they certainly weren't the best. That evening, I worked late into the night, making calls, sending emails, setting pieces into motion. Victoria thought she had won, but she didn't understand the fashion industry like I did. She saw glamour and prestige. I saw relationships and craftsmanship built over years. My assistant, Sophie, stayed with me, her loyalty unwavering. "What are we going to do?" she asked, bringing me another coffee. I smiled, thinking about the plans already taking shape. "We're going to build something new, something better." By midnight, my office was packed up, but not in the way Victoria and Madison expected. The real designs, the ones that would have revolutionized Lena Rose, were safely stored away. What they would find tomorrow would be old sketches, outdated samples, nothing of real value. As I drove home that night, I thought about my mother's words from years ago. In fashion, like in life, timing is everything. Sometimes you have to let them think they've won before you show your true collection. The next morning, I arrived early to find Madison already in my office surrounded by moving boxes. She looked up surprised to see me. "Just getting the last of my things," I said pleasantly, picking up a framed photo of my mother and me. "Whatever," Madison shrugged. "Just make it quick. I have a meeting with the design team in an hour. We're going to completely revamp the brand's image." I nodded, hiding my smile. What Madison didn't know was that half the design team had already resigned, following me to my next venture. Loyalty in fashion was rare, but my mother had taught me to treat everyone from seamstresses to models with respect. It was paying off now. As I walked out of the Lena Rose building for the last time, I didn't look back. Victoria and Madison thought they had destroyed me, but they had actually set me free. The real story was just beginning, and Paris Fashion Week was only 11 months away. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by sketches and fabric samples. My phone buzzed with a text from Monsieur Laurent. "Everything is arranged. The atelier in Paris awaits you. Your mother would be proud." I ran my fingers over the soft leather of my mother's journal, thinking about the journey ahead. Victoria had taken Lena Rose, but she couldn't take my talent, my connections, or my determination. She thought she had written the final chapter of my story, but she had only set up the perfect plot twist. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. While Victoria and Madison paraded around New York giving interviews about their exciting new direction for Lena Rose, I was quietly building something extraordinary. My new workshop, hidden in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, buzzed with energy as my loyal team worked on what would become our debut collection. Sophie managed to keep tabs on Lena Rose through her industry contacts. The reports weren't surprising. Madison's fresh vision consisted mainly of copying other designers' work while Victoria strong-armed retailers into maintaining their contracts despite the declining quality. "They're running it into the ground," Sophie reported one evening, shaking her head. "The fall collection is a disaster. The craftsmanship is gone and the designs, well, let's just say fast fashion does it better." I focus on my work channeling every emotion into my designs. This collection would be different from anything I had done at Lena Rose. It was bolder, more authentic, infused with both pain and triumph. Each piece told a story of resilience, of rising from the ashes. The fashion industry thrives on whispers, and soon quiet rumors begin circulating about a mysterious new designer preparing something extraordinary for Paris. Victoria and Madison, too caught up in their perceived victory, paid no attention to these murmurs. 3 months after being forced out of Lena Rose, I received another call from Monsieur Laurent. "Everything is set, Sherry. The slot at Paris Fashion Week is yours. Show them what real fashion looks like." That evening, as I stood in my workshop surrounded by the beginnings of my new collection, I finally allowed myself to smile. Victoria thought she had destroyed my fashion brand, but she had actually given me the push I needed to create something far more meaningful. 6 months after being ousted from Lena Rose, I stood in my Brooklyn workshop surrounded by what would become my redemption. The space hummed with the sound of sewing machines and quiet conversation as my team worked tirelessly on our debut collection. Every stitch, every seam was a step closer to Paris. "Elena, you need to see this," Sophie called from her desk, turning her laptop screen toward me. The headline made my stomach turn. "Lena Rose faces quality complaints as major retailers consider pulling out." The article detailed how the brand, my brand, was struggling under its new leadership. Madison's lack of experience was showing, and Victoria's aggressive management style had alienated key partners. The photos accompanying the piece show poorly constructed garments and derivative designs that bore little resemblance to the quality Lena Rose had once been known for. "They're destroying everything we built," Sophie said quietly. I shook my head, returning to the intricate beadwork I've been supervising. "They're destroying everything they stole." I corrected her. "What we built is right here." The truth was, watching Lena Rose's decline hurt more than I wanted to admit. It was like seeing someone slowly dismantle your childhood home, but I couldn't afford to dwell on it. Not with Paris Fashion Week, just 5 months away. My phone buzzed with a text from Monsieur Laurent. "Just saw the latest Lena Rose pieces. Catastrophe. But your samples? Magnifique. The buyers are already asking questions." I smiled, thinking about the carefully orchestrated whispers we've been feeding into the fashion grapevine. The industry thrived on mystery and anticipation, and we were giving them exactly that. No one knew I was behind the new label yet. All they knew was that something extraordinary was coming. That afternoon, I had a meeting with Marie Chen, a buyer from one of the most prestigious department stores in Paris. She had flown in specifically to see our progress, having heard rumors about our collection. "These pieces," she said, running her fingers over a hand-beaded evening gown, "they tell a story. Each one is like a chapter in a book I can't wait to finish reading." I watched as she examined the craftsmanship, knowing how her eyes widened at certain details. This wasn't just fashion. It was artistry, emotion translated into fabric and form. Every piece carried echoes of my journey. Strength disguised as elegance, resilience masked as beauty. "The market is hungry for something real," Marie continued. "Something was sold. Lena Rose used to have that. But now," she shrugged eloquently, "their latest collection feels empty. But this," she gestured to the workshop, "this is what fashion should be." After she left, I received an email that made my heart race. The chamber Cindy called de la haute couture had reviewed our preliminary submissions. We were officially approved for the haute couture segment of Paris Fashion Week, a rare honor for a new label. That evening, as I was leaving the workshop, I quite literally ran into my father outside the building. The shock on his face told me he hadn't known this was where I've been working. "Alana," he said, looking confused. "What are you doing here?" I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze. "Working, Dad, something you might want to remind Madison about." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "About that, I know things have been difficult, but Victoria assures me Madison is learning quickly. The transition has been disastrous." I supplied, "Yes, I've seen the reviews." "Was it worth it, Dad? Trading your daughter's dream for your wife's approval?" "Elena, that's not fair. We're still family." "Family?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Family doesn't destroy what someone spent a decade building. Family doesn't stand by while their child's work is stolen. "But you know what? Thank you." "Thank you," he repeated, bewildered. "Yes, because if you and Victoria hadn't shown me exactly who you are, I might never have found the courage to do this." I gestured to the workshop behind me. "Now he'll excuse me. I have work to do." I left him standing there, his expression, a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Let him wonder. Let him worry. The time for explanations was long past. Back in my apartment that night, I received another call from Sophie. "Victoria's trying to track down our suppliers," she reported. "She's figured out something's happening, but she doesn't know what." I smiled, thinking of the contracts I've secured through my mother's old connections. Let her try. Those relationships weren't built with money. They were built with trust and respect. Two things Victoria knows nothing about. The next few weeks were crucial. As we finalized the collection, news of Lena Rose's troubles continued to mount. Madison's attempts to copy other designers had resulted in several legal threats, and Victoria's response, throwing lawyers and money at the problem, only made things worse. One morning, I arrived at the workshop to find an unexpected visitor waiting. It was Isabella Romano, one of the most influential fashion journalists in the industry. "I hope you don't mind the ambush," she said, rising from her seat. But when I heard whispers about what was happening here, I had to see for myself. I knew Isabella from my Lena Rose days. She had been one of the first to recognize my talent. More importantly, she had been my mother's friend. "Your mother would be proud," she said, looking around the workshop. "She always said you would surpass her, and now I see it. This collection, it's not just fashion. It's a statement." As she toured the workshop, examining pieces and talking with my team, I could see her piecing the story together. Isabella had always been known for her ability to spot not just trends, but narratives in the fashion world. "You're not just creating clothes," she said, finally. "You're creating redemption. This is your response to what happened at Lena Rose, isn't it?" I nodded, seeing no point in denying it. Everything they took from me taught me something. Every betrayal made these designs stronger. Isabella's article appeared 2 weeks later. While it didn't name me directly, it painted a compelling picture of a phoenix rising from the ashes of corporate greed and hinted at a debut that would shake the foundations of Paris Fashion Week. The response was immediate. Industry insiders began speculating about the mysterious new designer, and buyers started reaching out, trying to secure appointments during Paris Fashion Week. Victoria must have read the article too, because the next day, I received my first direct contact from her since the takeover. The email was brief but telling. "Whatever you're planning, remember who still controls the Lena Rose name. Don't do anything you'll regret." I forwarded the email to my lawyer without responding. Victoria's threat was empty. She might control the Lena Rose name, but she couldn't control what was coming. 3 months before Paris Fashion Week, we began final fittings. The collection had evolved into something even more powerful than I'd initially envisioned. Each piece carried elements of my journey, structures that seemed delicate but proved unbreakable, designs that revealed hidden strength in unexpected places. The centerpiece was a gown that told my entire story. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple black dress, but as the wearer moved, layers of color and texture were revealed, like truth emerging from darkness. The beading pattern, visible only under certain lights, spelled out rise in my mother's handwriting, taken from one of her old design sketches. Madison must have been feeling the pressure because she began making desperate moves. She tried to poach members of my team, offering double their salaries. Not one accepted. "Money isn't everything," my head seamstress told me after turning down Madison's offer. "Some things matter more, like loyalty and respect." 2 months before Paris, we received word that Lena Rose was struggling to complete their collection. Victoria had resorted to hiring freelance designers to fill the gaps left by Madison's inadequate leadership, but the results were disjointed and uninspired. Victoria and Madison would find out soon enough, but first, they'd have to watch as their stolen kingdom crumbled around them. Paris in September was exactly as my mother had described it, a city that breathed fashion and exhaled art. Standing in the atelier Monsieur Laurent had arranged for our final preparations, I watched the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and rose. "The schedule just leaked," Sophie announced, rushing in with her tablet. "We're showing right after Lena Rose." Victoria must be furious. All the major buyers and press will be there to see both shows. I smiled, remembering Monsieur Lawrence's week when he told me about the scheduling. Perfect timing. The fashion world was buzzing with anticipation. Our mysterious new label had become the talk of the week, with speculation reaching a fever pitch. Meanwhile, Lena Rose's pre-show coverage was less than flattering. "Sources say the collection is desperately uneven," Sophie read from her phone. "Many pieces appear rushed or poorly executed. Industry insiders question whether the brand can recover from its recent decline." Our own collection hung ready. Each piece perfect, each detail meticulously executed. 3 days before the show, Isabella Romano visited our atelier for an exclusive preview. "My God," she whispered, touching the centerpiece gown. "This isn't just fashion. It's justice served on silk and lace." On the morning of our show, I received an unexpected text from my father. "Selena Rose's rehearsal. Madison's crying, Victoria's threatening everyone. Please tell me you know what you're doing." I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on our final preparations. The models were ready, the music selected, the lighting perfectly designed. Everything had to be flawless. 2 hours before showtime, Sophie burst into my dressing room. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a live stream on her phone. The Lena Rose show was underway, and it was worse than anyone expected. Madison's collection was a disaster of mismatch influences and poor execution. The models looked uncomfortable, the clothes ill-fitting. In the front row, Victoria's face grew increasingly rigid as whispers spread through the audience. "She's ruined the brand," Sophie whispered. "No." I corrected her. "They ruined it together." As Lena Rose's show ended to tepid applause, our team sprang into action. The venue would be reset for our show in less than an hour. I watched from backstage as the audience remained seated, unwilling to lose their spots for the most anticipated show of the week. Victoria and Madison stayed in the front row, their faces of study and contrasts. Madison neared tears, Victoria seething. They still didn't know what was coming. The lights dimmed. The music began. A hauntingly beautiful piece my mother used to play while designing, and then magic happened. Our first model emerged in a creation that made the audience audibly gasp. Each piece that followed told part of our story. Resilience, rebirth, revenge served with impeccable style. The craftsmanship was undeniable. The creativity unmatched. From my position backstage, I could see Victoria's face as she slowly realized what she was watching. The designs carry echoes of my style but were elevated, evolved. This wasn't just a collection, it was a statement of survival. The centerpiece gown drew an unprecedented reaction as the model turned, revealing the hidden rise beating. Cameras flashed frantically. In the front row, Isabella Romano was smiling, tears in her eyes. For the finale, all the models returned to the runway, creating a living gallery of artistry and defiance. The applause was deafening, and then the moment came. As tradition dictated, the designer needed to take a bow. I stepped onto the runway, and the room went silent for a moment before erupting into even louder applause. Victoria's face went pale. Madison's mouth fell open. Isabella Romano was the first to stand, triggering a standing ovation that seemed to shake the venue. Fashion editors were already typing frantically on their phones. Buyers were signaling their assistance. I walked the length of the runway, stopping directly in front of Victoria and Madison. "Thank you for teaching me to rise," I said just loud enough for them to hear over the applause. The aftermath was immediate. Buyers swarmed backstage, orders were placed, and exclusive contracts were offered. But the real satisfaction came from watching Victoria and Madison try to slip out unnoticed, only to be confronted by journalists asking about their connection to the designer Ghetto's triumph. "Elena," Monsieur Laurent embraced me backstage. "Your mother would be so proud. You have not just survived, you have soared." The post-show press conference was electric. Journalists wanted to know everything about my departure from Lena Rose, about the inspiration behind the new collection, about what came next. "Sometimes," I told them, "losing everything shows you what you're truly capable of creating." As hashtags trended and orders flooded in, Sophie showed me the first online reviews. "Historic Gibbwood, a star reborn. The future of fashion has a new name." Victoria's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and she knew it. Her phone calls went straight to voicemail. Her emails remained unanswered. Her power had always been borrowed. Mine was earned. The next morning, as Paris Fashion Week continued, the true impact of our show became clear. Major retailers were already canceling their Lena Rose orders, choosing instead to invest in my new label. The industry had spoken. "What happens now?" Sophie asked as we watched the sunrise over Paris. I smiled, thinking of all the designs still waiting to be brought to life. Now we build something true. The fashion world is built on beauty, but it stands on truth. Victoria and Madison had tried to steal my legacy, but they had only succeeded in forcing me to create something far more powerful, my own destiny. The morning after the show, Paris was covered in headlines. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications as the fashion world processed what they had witnessed. But the message that caught my attention came from an unexpected source, my father. "I'm in the lobby of your hotel. Please, can we talk?" I considered ignoring it, but something in me had shifted. Success hadn't just given me confidence, it had given me peace. I texted back 15 minutes. He looked older than I remembered, sitting there in the elegant hotel lobby. When he saw me, he stood up, then seemed unsure whether to hug me or shake my hand. He ended up doing neither. "Your mother's beating technique," he said quietly. I recognized it in the final piece. She would have loved that. "You noticed?" I was surprised. He had always seemed so disconnected from our fashion discussions. "I noticed everything, Elena. I was just too weak to stand up for it." "For you," he pulled out his phone showing me the morning's headlines. "But you didn't need me to, did you?" The headlines told the story. Fashion's phoenix rises. Elena Anderson's triumphant return overshadows Lena Rose's disaster, and Victoria Bennett's fashion empire crumbles as stepdaughter claims crown. "Victoria's furious," he continued. "She's been up all night trying to do damage control, but the buyers are canceling orders left and right. Madison